maybe what Jesus really wanted was to show us what we're all capable of doing.
Kris Land is a visionary author, spiritual teacher, and multidisciplinary creator whose work bridges mysticism, emotional healing, and personal transformation. He's the author of The Infinity Within, a genre-defying spiritual memoir that blends inner awakening with mystic storytelling. Through his writing, speaking, and entrepreneurial ventures, Kris helps others reconnect with their inner power, confront fear, and remember who they truly are. Welcome to Uncorking a Story, Kris.
Hello, Mike. Thank you very much for having me on your podcast.
I'm excited to have you here, Kris. I can't wait to get into our conversation, and I'm going to start where I always do with my author guest, which is by asking, where does your story as an author begin?
That's kind of a broad question for me. I grew up in North Dakota. I was very much what would be considered a computer geek. So I started selling Apple II computers when I was in junior high. And one of the customers wanted some accounting software. So he and I kind of created a little company together. I was the programmer. He was the guy that told me what to program. And then ended up selling the company.
So don't tell me it was like Lotus 1, 2, 3.
It wasn't Lotus, but it did become Great Plains.
Okay.
So, which is still around to my knowledge.
That's young to be having so much success. How did you deal with that?
So, after selling the company and making a fair amount of money, I'd moved to San Diego and basically hit a huge dip of depression. And it comes back to the stories about how people win the lottery and ruin their lives. I at least had a vision of one way that happens, and that is I had blown all the goals I thought I was supposed to achieve, and I didn't know what I was going to do next. I was completely lost in like what direction, what goals I had. And I got hired at a bank in San Diego, and during the same time, my kind of clawing out of the depression is I came up with 3 goals that I can work on daily, never fully achieve, and yet always strive for. And that was to have fun, learn, and do neither at the harm or impedance of others. And with those 3 goals, I could kind of claw my way out of this place. And then my boss was, he told me he was an atheist. And even though I have no problem with people wanting to believe whatever they believe, it didn't sit right for me, for him. And so I got very curious about that and ended up working through a set of 4 questions that when asked, it kind of shows that all the upside is in believing you have a soul and all the downside is in believing you don't, regardless of whether you do or don't. And so after going through that with Kris, that was my boss's name as well, it kind of changed his perspective on things, but it left me with a question. Great, if we have a soul, what is it? And then kind of 3 things, or I've already talked about one of them, but 2 other things collided with this question of why do we have a soul or what is it? And that was I'd spent a lot of time studying different theologies growing up because I was always curious about them. And I also had a lot of what are considered not normal things happen to me growing up. I started with my first out-of-body experience and complete kind of disorientation when I was 6 years old. I had multiple times of that. I had a near-death experience that from normal physics, I shouldn't be here. But it provided me with a very different look and perception of what's going on and what life looks like and what we're told is really the illusion, and what's really going on when we pay attention is actually the real stuff. And so what ended up happening is I went down the path of, great, what's a soul? And to simplify this, I'm going to use one particular book, which is, I believe, the most read book on the planet, and that's the Bible. And it has some really cool chapters and verses. And it turns out there's a bunch throughout the entire book that say kind of the same thing. And that is that we are the children of God, that we will inherit all that our Father is. And, Jesus tells his disciples, you'll do everything I have done and much more. Well, that leaves us with a question. So if you take that in a literal way, what that kind of says is we're a bunch, our souls, what we are is really a bunch of gods running around, which is an interesting question, because then the next question after that is, okay, great, let's run with that. What are we doing here? What's the purpose? Why? And so that led me down the path of, well, first off, what is a soul, meaning a infinite being, do? I could only come up with three things. Create stuff, meaning universes, planets, whatever. Destroy stuff, and play games. And that was all I could come up with when you break it right down. So then you take a look at, well, creating stuff and destroying stuff, that's pretty easy to describe. But what is a game? What makes a game? Well, again, I could only come up with three things. You have pieces, you have turns, and you have rules. Okay, so if we run with that and we take a look at this thing called the planet Earth and we say, okay, this is the game of planet Earth, what is it? Well, it's a fourth dimensional construct, meaning that the primary motivator is time. Time doesn't exist in 3 dimensions and below, and in 5 dimensions above it exists, but it's not the primary motivator. So we have this fourth dimensional construct called the game of planet Earth, or planet Earth. What would a soul or a soul being find interesting? What would it want to do? Why would it want to play in a game like that? What would be of interest? What would actually be something that would drive a soul to want to be here? Could only come up with one thing. You want to take a stab at it?
I'm not nearly smart enough to take a thing. Well, okay, I'll throw something down. Learn.
Very close. I mean, pretty much spot on. It's a slight difference, and that is experience emotion.
Okay.
Or experiences, which is really a major set of learning, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Learning, creativity, experience, all those are kind of globbed together. Okay, so we have this thing. Let's run with that. Souls at the pearly gates looking into this game says, great, I'm going to play. Well, the pieces are pretty obvious. It's a piece of us, right? The turns, well, that could be lifetimes, right? And then what do the rules look like? Well, the first rule that I came up with would have to be that we'd agree to put all of our godlike abilities to the side in order to play. Because if we didn't, that would be the equivalent of you and I sitting down and play Monopoly, and I just grab all the properties and all the money and say, okay, we're done.
Right, or playing a video game only using cheat codes, right?
Exactly.
Not really learning.
Yeah, it'd be very boring, right? So the first rule is we agree to put all of our abilities to the side when we enter into this thing. Well, that kind of works for the primary mission of experience or experiencing emotion, except for the fact that if my favorite dog runs across the street and gets run over, I can just go draw on these powers, change the outcome, and do that for anything I don't like that happens. Well, that doesn't really give me the breadth of experiencing of existence or emotion if I can change anything I don't like. So in comes rule number 2. Rule number 2 is I agree to forget I ever had them. Well, that works, except by itself becomes an infinite trap. In other words, we would have a piece of ourselves stuck in here forever. Well, that's not, I'm going to assume that a soul-like being is pretty smart and not going to do something like that. And so then we come with number 3, and that is that we're going to have turns. And that even before we enter the game, we have a rough idea of what we want to experience, how many turns we're going to take, what we want to accomplish in each turn before we win the game, so to speak. In other words, leave.
So kind of coming in with a soul blueprint, if you will.
Exactly right. So now what that means then is we come in, we're in our life, and we play the turn. And if we accomplish what we set roughly out to do, we get to move on. But if we don't, we get to do that turn over and over and over again until such time as we figure out what we're there for and move on to the next turn, and eventually leave. Okay, great. Then the fourth rule that really kind of irons in the process of what we're here for is that we agree to be fully invested when we're playing. The other four rules, you have to get the book and read it. But basically, I'm getting to your answer of what got me in the authoring path, and that is I put together this whole construct. I then spent a lot of time diving deep into this. I hired a ghostwriter because I was not an author at the time. The ghostwriter kept wanting to make it her own story, so I fired the ghostwriter, put all my notes in a filing cabinet, and then they sat for 40 years. Then I went on to my entrepreneurial side, and I founded 11 other companies, took one public, the other were either acquired or merged, and then moved from San Diego to Central Texas with my wife, and I have 3 young boys. And my wife said, you need to finish this book. So in the beginning of 25, I sat down. Well, before I did that, I started about 5 years ago writing and finally becoming an author. And I wrote my first book on construction, which during my technology background, my hobby was constructing and building houses. My work was technical based, computers, software, and those things. So I built kind of like a checklist of how to build a house from the beginning to the end, like buying the property, going through the process all the way to landscaping and moving in. So I had this really cool checklist that worked out really well from a timing point of view. And I said, well, that's a really easy thing for me to write about because I've done it, I know it, I'm comfortable with it, and it works. So I started my first book writing. It's a 10-book series, of which I've now written 5. The 6th, I've got illustrations I'm working on. But that got me comfortable in that writing space as being an author and actually being accepted and people buying it, which is really cool, and making a difference. Getting the reviews that says, yeah, this saved me thousands of dollars because when I read your book and this sub tried to do this on me, or my contractor tried to do these things to me, you'd given me some warnings on what to look out for, which was the goal in writing these books, is to arm people with enough knowledge to not get fully taken advantage of during the process, because there's a lot of really good people that build houses and there's a lot that aren't so good.
Yeah.
Then I wrote a finance book, and the only reason I wrote that is I was doing mentoring. I'm still doing mentoring for business people, and there's a set of questions that I would constantly be asked, and it's all fundamental questions that are both complicated and not at the same time. But I wish I had been taught these things when I was in my teens and my 20s. And so I wrote this book for me if I was still in my teens or 20s. And that's been doing fairly well. It's called The Finance Book for Young Adults. And then that's where my wife finally said, you need to finish this book, which was originally called The Soul Path. And in July of 25, I published The Infinity Within, which is what got us here today.
Yeah, so we're gonna take a step forward in a moment, but I need to take a big step back, but not before making this observation. And this is, of course, I talk to authors all the time. One of the things that, I see separates successful authors from those who are less successful. They're the ones who write the book that they wish they had but cannot find. And that is, I think that's true for many creators. Write the movie that you'd want to see that you haven't seen yet, that kind of thing.
Exactly.
So that's certainly I would say a key to your success, obviously the talent and the persistence is important too. But I don't want to let something go that you mentioned, earlier in the conversation, which was, feeling different even as a child. You mentioned having an out-of-body experience, and I'm just, would invite you to tell me just a little bit more about that.
So the first time it happened is I was 6 years old, and I was sitting on the floor in my room, and it was like early evening, and everything became transparent. Everything had the consistency of a piece of tissue paper or smoke. I could hear voices from everywhere, and I could see effectively everywhere. And I went to pick up this toy train I had in front of me, and it when I picked it up, even though it still had the volume, it felt like it was smoke or tissue paper. Mm-hmm. Scared the crap out of me, ran up to my parents, and they told me it was a dream, and then that was the end of it. And then I had that happen again when I was 8 years old. Same kind of thing. I played with it a little bit longer, listened to the voices a little bit more, which I found fascinating because they were actual conversations if I focused in. Still got scared, ran to my parents, and it went away. The third time, this is where people sometimes have to take a grain of salt with it. The third time, so because I started working early, I started making money at an early age. And I bought something for myself that was really cool back in those days, and that was a Cal King waterbed. Just to date it a little bit more, right? So I was sitting against my Cal King, and these things are massive. These are not tiny things, right? I mean, the wood is massive because it's containing this giant bubble of water. And I'm sitting against the bed. I go into this out-of-body experience. I'm kind of listening and watching and doing stuff. And I turned around and took my finger and pushed the waterbed. And it moved. Scared the crap out of me, ran up to my folks, and it went away, right? But the next morning when I went down, there's a mark on the carpet where the bed had been 3 inches moved. So you have to be there to have the same effect it had on me. But for me, instead of it being a dream or I ate the wrong food or being told that it didn't happen, I had actual physical proof. Because there's no way in where that bed moved without some sort of crane.
Yeah.
So that started me on the journey of really diving in deep into, wait a minute, things aren't what they seem. They're not what we're told. And it reminds me of The Matrix. And
I was just going to say and ask you, are we living in the Matrix? And are you Neo or are you Morpheus?
So the answer is maybe all of the above. If we are souls that have put ourselves into this game, and based on the theologies, all the different ones I've studied, the semantics are different, but what they say are pretty much all the same. I mean, even back to the Egyptians and the Sanskrit documents dealing with reincarnation, it's all there. And so if we're this soul being and we just allow that to be real for a minute, and we've put all of our abilities to the side and agreed to forget them, however, we have cheat codes. My out-of-body experiences and my near-death experience, I would consider to be fairly large cheat codes. And if you've ever been through an NDE or talked to somebody that's been through an NDE, that is a really big cheat code that I would suggest you don't go do. Because it's a very black and white cheat code, and that is you either get a near-death experience or a death experience.
Right.
So it's kind of cut and dried. However, every single person I've ever talked to that's gone through one, it has fundamentally changed the way they look at what's happening and going on. And so whether we're in a matrix construct that is a computer construct, if that's what you were asking, or we're in the game of Earth, which is a construct that we chose to play in, what would be the difference?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like, just to get super nerdy, because I'm a computer guy too, but Star Trek: The Next Generation had the holodeck, right? And so that's where Picard would go, and he'd play Dixon Hill. Dixon Hall. Dixon Hall is my good friend. It's Dixon Hill. And so that constructs an environment that you believe. I mean, everything is real. And from what I'm hearing you say, we're kind of in a holodeck of our own making right now. You figured out a way, well, maybe you didn't figure it out, but you experienced a way a few times when you were younger to see through the veil of the programming. Most of us haven't been able to do that. Did you ever come to a rhyme or a reason why you were able to see through the veil? Is this anyone in your family? Sometimes people will say, my grandmother had this gift, or this kind of runs in our family. Anything like that for you, Kris?
The only thing I can say is that for a time I played with this stuff called auditing, which is a Scientology thing.
Yeah.
And I won't get into all the pros and cons of things, but the auditing part itself, I think, is a very valuable tool, the way they do it. And there's actually a particular auditing session I went through, which again takes a grain of salt. And we can go into that if you'd like. But the reason I bring it up is that in doing the auditing I did, according to what I found out, I've only been in about 3 or 4 turns now. I'm a very new entry or co-creator in this game. And so I may have agreed to put bigger or more obvious cheat codes in when I decided to join. Mm-hmm. That's the only thing I can guess at, but that's just a guess.
Yeah, I mean, you might need the whole shaker of salt. But yeah, because I can think about it a few ways, right? So if you're a newer soul and you're young in this experience, in this game, you're on turn 4, maybe you have a closer connection to where you came from, right? For the other side. And maybe that explains it. Or it could be, hey, maybe you're close to the end. Maybe you're getting your final turns in and you're being shown or being reminded, hey, what's to come? I don't know. But I guess my mind could think of it in a couple of different ways.
Absolutely.
So we're flashing forward again. So you write this finance book. It does well. You've got your series of 10 books, written 5, selling very well. You've got the confidence now to write the book that you wanted to write, decades ago. You've got the encouragement of somebody in your life who's very close with you, which is very important for writers out there. Having somebody who encourage you, who believes in you, is it's part of that magical recipe of talent and persistence and all that. So tell me, what was the writing process like for this? We fired the ghostwriter. The ghostwriter is gone. So now the pen or the keyboard is in your hand. What happens next?
Well, keep in mind that I fired the ghostwriter 40 years ago.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah.
So
most of my listeners weren't even born yet when you fired the ghostwriter.
So the concepts, the construct, and the ideas that I put together 40 plus years ago, I've been operating with and on since then. The way I look at life, the way I look at what a lot of people call coincidences, I don't believe in coincidences. In fact, my keyword phrase is I don't believe in quinkadinks. and the reason being is that, as an example, growing up and even today, I could be sitting in a coffee shop or restaurant by myself, reading my book happily, and some random person will pull up a chair, not ask, just pull up a chair, sit down, tell me their life story, have a conversation, get up and leave, and that's it. And initially, I never really got angry about it. I always found it fascinating, but I was like, why? And so I started really looking deep into the why. And what I found with every single person is that they sat down because they needed to hear something I had to say, and I needed to hear something they had to say. So is that a coincidence? Or are we really all connected and making agreements behind the scenes that we're just not paying attention to because we're taught to ignore them? And what I mean by that, and this touches on your idea of a new soul versus a new entry into a turn, how many stories have you heard of kids that talk about seeing ghosts and seeing things that are paranormal?
Yeah. Yeah. It's very common with young children.
Okay, so what do parents typically do? And they mean well, but what do they typically do when their child comes and tells them they've seen ghosts, or in my example, had an out-of-body experience?
Oh, they gaslight them, oh, it's just your imagination.
But they do it because they see the child is in fear, right? That they want to calm them down. Whatever happened is fearful. They don't understand it because they've been told it's not real. And so exactly right. They say, well, that didn't happen. You ate the wrong bread, or you had a dream, or you imagined it. And so we're taught from a very young age to not see behind the curtain and not pay attention to what I would call the small and medium-sized miracles that happen daily. And so when somebody sits down and starts talking to me, I can look at it as, that's just a coincidence. This random person just decided for whatever reason, maybe they had a couple too many beers before they sat down, right? But I can come up with all kinds of excuses why they came down, or I can be really curious and say, well, wait a minute, what really happened underneath or behind the curtain? And the more in tune each of us are with these coincidences, and stop looking at them as coincidences, and maybe they were there and happening as part of your path, then you start, at least in the construct idea, start looking behind the curtain a little bit more and start reattaching to what you really are, or remembering what you actually can do.
Right. It's those, it brings me back to the book that I read in the 90s. It was a long time ago, The Celestine Prophecy by James Redfield. And that was one of his first principles, is that there are no coincidences in life. That doesn't mean everything is pre-planned or doesn't necessarily challenge free will, but some things are meant to be. I had an experience a couple of summers ago. I was invited to... Actually, a couple of falls ago, I was invited to speak in California at a weekend conference for an industry association that I'm a part of. So they were flying me out from, the greater New York area over there on their dime, which is great. And they also had a second speaker who was flying in from Puerto Rico. So she and I never met each other, and we decided to have dinner the night before the conference. And, we get to talking. And I asked her how her business was going, because, our business is being challenged by AI and technology and all this stuff. We talk to people for a living and try to make sense of it. So she's like, well, my summer was a little challenging because I had a death in the family. I said, okay. And she started, talking about how she lost her brother. And that same summer, I had lost my brother. And she lost her brother due to lung-related illness. I lost my brother to lung cancer. Both were very healthy and, didn't engage in high-risk behaviors, although I would never, blame somebody for getting cancer. But it just didn't make sense, why these two healthy people came down with something like this. And we talked probably for 4 hours that night, through appetizers, cocktails, dinner, dessert, and just, and formed what I would consider a lifelong friendship, because we have that bond. Now, it was it could have been totally random, and she didn't have to say anything to me, a complete stranger at that point, about losing her brother. I mean, it's a very intimate thing to divulge, but we both, felt very comfortable talking to each other. And I think that's one of those situations where I recognize as something that was supposed to happen.
Well, when you say our path is not written, I agree with you. that would not make for a very fun game if we knew that we were going to roll a 6 and then a 5 and then a 3 and we had everything spelled out, right? So we enter into the game. We have certain things that we want to accomplish. And then I would say that we're all interconnected. We're all co-creators in what's going on. And so as you're moving through this turn, you had some things happen, like your brother passing away and different things. And I would argue that at some moment in that very specific near-term time, you made a connection. In other words, your soul went out and searched for another soul that needed to have a conversation around these things. And then she got on the plane, you got on the plane, the universe figured out how to get all this manifested, and in you guys come to a place, sit down and have dinner. Now, if you look at it from what are the chances of you guys from different parts of the planet having dinner at this particular night to have these discussions, the chances are pretty remote. And yet it all happened. And so when I first, I think I mentioned this earlier, when I first was writing the book, the original name of the book was going to be called The Soul Path, or, the path of the soul, or something along those lines. Because as we're moving through our path, each of our lifetimes, we have a rough draft of what we want to do. So I would argue that when we're reincarnated, we actually pick the country and the family that we're going to enter into based on what's going on in general with that family, in that country, in that place, in that time, in order to achieve whatever it is that we want to achieve for that turn. And so we fundamentally set ourselves up for entry into whatever the cases are. Beyond that, everything is kind of free form and free will, because again, what would be the point of a game where things are predetermined? The only thing that I would think or that I came up with that is probably somewhat predetermined is the things you need to accomplish to move on to the next turn. And the only reason is because that's what makes part of the game really hard. The agnostics have this concept of the archons. Have you ever heard of them?
I have not.
So the archons are referenced in the Bible. The agnostics, there's a couple different other places that different theologies pick up the archons. The archons, in the kind of darkest sense, are the gods that created reality, the game we're in. And they feed on negative energy, negative emotion. And so they deterministically figure out ways to make things really hard and difficult in order to feed on really hard and difficult emotion. I would say that if we're a soul being, we're probably not going to be naive enough to put that kind of power around us, because that makes the game kind of a big trap, right? But I could see where we would agree to have Archon or Archon-like things happening in order to muddy the water and keep the curtain in place so that we have to keep doing the turns over until we really figure out what we're supposed to figure out. And I have talked with some people that arguably have been in this game, if you want to look at it this way, for hundreds of turns and maybe even thousands of turns. So it's designed to be extremely difficult. And if you think about it this way, as a human being, how often do you play tic-tac-toe?
Right. Not very often.
How come?
Because it's boring.
Right. Within a few times, you kind of get it figured out, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, in Monopoly, you play occasionally, but more for the experience than the actual game itself, because it's really everything's based on how well you roll that dice. There's not a lot of challenge in the game other than roll the dice and spend your money. Probably the most interesting game. I mean, chess is pretty interesting, and then Go is pretty challenging. But my point is, if you're this omnipotent infinite being, you're not going to pick tic-tac-toe to go play. You're going to pick a pretty tough game in order to really experience and have fun with it. And so I think this game is intentionally designed to keep us here and make things difficult until we're paying attention to those signposts and those things and start reattaching to what we are.
So how does it benefit the soul after their turns are done, right? After you're done playing the game, right? However many times you went.
Yep.
What is the benefit to the soul when it then, leaves this playing field?
Okay. What is the benefit as you as a human in playing your favorite game with your friends?
Right. Perhaps winning, learning something, feeling a little bit more confident in my abilities, all that stuff.
Experience.
Yeah.
The joys and the fears, oh my goodness, I lost these pieces, or oh my goodness, I won these pieces, or, the ups and downs, the roller coaster, the whole thing, right? The journey. Well, if a soul, if you extrapolate that up, we play Monopoly, chess, Go, whatever the games are we play, or we go watch football, or we play football, or have you ever been to a soccer game in Europe? I mean, they're pretty serious about their game.
There's a lot of chanting and scarves.
Chanting, and I was in Italy at the big, I think it's called the Fiero, where they were throwing mopeds off the second story of the building on people. So yeah, they're pretty serious. I mean, first time I lived in Milan for a while, and the first game they had, the first time I was there and they had a game, in the morning they started loading in, arriving truckloads. I'm talking probably 20, filled with riot police, riot gear, helmets, shields, batons. It looked like a freaking army was moving in. And this is for a soccer game. Holy cow. I was astounded. I've never seen anything like this. I mean, it was like a small army moved in so that they got ready for that evening's game of soccer. So the point is that that's the human experience. If you move that up a notch, and the soul really can only do three things, assuming I'm right, is create stuff, destroy stuff, and play games, it's going to pick some pretty difficult things to do. So in answer to your question, what's the result at the end when I finally accomplish what I set out to do? Is I had a fun game and I experienced a bunch that I can't experience outside of time. If you don't have time, you can't experience emotion. You can't have the movement and the experience and the ups and downs and the roller coaster without the presence of time.
It's such a big thing to think about, because then it brings me to, okay, well, each of us has a soul, and the population is always growing, right? So we're, I don't know how many, 8 billion people now, maybe double the size it was when I was a kid. It was 4 billion when I was growing up.
Yep, I remember the 4 billion days.
the good old days. But so are there an infinite number of souls? I mean, is there just like a repository of souls, or are there a finite number of souls?
Well, that's an interesting question. There's a couple of different ways you can look at that. One is you could have a omnipresent soul that has the ability to fractionate into an infinite number of pieces, or you have an infinite number of pieces or souls that are independent, or you have a fixed number that can fractionate into partials. I mean, there's a lot of ways to look at it. There's no way for me to prove any of them. But I don't think if you look at how big space is in this fourth dimensional construct, and then you jump out of that construct and now you have an infinite number of dimensions, and each dimension has an infinite number of constructs, that's a really big space.
Yeah.
So you could have a really large number of souls running around doing stuff.
Yeah, interesting thing when he mentioned sort of one soul that can create an infinite number of fractals. It reminded me of, I know, this hymn we used to sing. Maybe it wasn't a hymn. I don't remember. this notion of not one bread, one body, maybe it was one tree with many branches. That's what I'm looking for. We're all part of the same body. We're all individual pieces of that same body, but we ladder up to something else that's not necessarily individual, more collective. That's where my mind was going when you were saying that.
Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, and there are a number of theologies that have different discussions around those concepts.
Yeah, and there's a lot of mysticism in theologies, like even in the OG Catholicism, which is my background. There's the mystics are the most interesting people, I think, because they go there, man. They go there. It's not just about dogma. It's about something bigger. The dogma is what turns most people off, I think, but the mysticism keeps some people in.
Absolutely agreed.
So getting back to the infinity within. And the writing of it. So if my timeline is right, it's early 2025, and you're typing away at it. What did you learn about yourself that you didn't know before writing this book?
There was absolutely a fundamental shift that was a huge aha moment for me in putting pen to paper, so to speak. Growing up, so my folks are United Methodist, and on top of that, my mom is and was a phenomenal multi-language speaker. And one of the things that she was learning back when I was in high school was Latin. And because of my business background, I was flying around a lot, and so she ended up studying at the Vatican under a guy named Reggie, who was the Pope's secretary. And so through that, I got some firsthand experience into kind of how the Vatican and the Pope at least that Pope looked at religion and Christianity and that whole process. Growing up, I always had difficulty with the thought process that Jesus and God are supposed to be on a pedestal. It just didn't, and it's not that, I mean, whatever people want to believe is fine. And I know that's where a lot of the belief goes, is that, we're supposed to hold God up here and Jesus up here in these kinds of constructs. But it never really I never really understood it. When I was writing The Infinity Within and putting pen to paper, and starting to really take a look at the chapters and verses that discuss things like we are the children of God and those types of things, what it did for me is it crystallized the concept of maybe what Jesus really wanted was to show us what we're all capable of doing, and that really, he just wanted to be a teacher, and that he came in for however many turns, maybe one, maybe a bunch, who knows. But that the whole thing around the writings and the early disciples and the things was not to put him on a pedestal, but that he really was a teacher and wanted to show us what we're all capable of doing by doing it. And one of the interesting things in the Bible is, when Jesus says, this is happening, it's not happening tomorrow or next week or a month from now. When he did stuff, it happened right then. Everything is very now based. And so now, as I was doing this and this kind of aha moment came up, I started rereading the Bible from just a slight shift in vantage of maybe I'm not supposed to put him on a pedestal. I'm actually supposed to listen to him and listen to these words from a point of a teacher showing me what I can do. And it really changed the way that the book read for me. And that was a huge shift, even though I kind of knew it before. In other words, I felt it before. Once I was writing the things I was writing down, it created this shift that now when I look at the Bible and I see the different chapters and verses and I look at them from the vantage of maybe this is supposed to be a little more literal than dogmatic or fluff. Maybe this is him saying, look, go do this. Go do it now.
Well, and he does. I mean, he does send the disciples out to do it, and the people who you will heal will be healed. People whose sins you forgive are forgiven. And there is this notion that the kingdom of heaven is within you.
Within us, yes.
Which is where, I mean, that's what I immediately thought of reading the title of your book, The Infinity Within. It's very, very similar to that notion.
And so if you start reading it from a more literal sense, it becomes really an interesting read. When I put the introduction of the book together, I picked 4 people as kind of the starting point. And 3 of them are relatively obvious. 2 of them exist in the past, 2 of them exist today. But the 4th one, my mom actually got really mad at me for adding. And that was, so the first one was really easy, Jesus, because there's a lot of really good stuff the Bible has to say and things that he did, and there's a lot of really good representations and a lot of really good material. The second one is the Buddha. Again, a lot of really good information, a lot of really good thought process and how to do things and calm the spirit and be present and those kinds of things. The third one is a gentleman that went through some hell in life. At least that's what I'm pretty sure he'll tell you. And that's Eckhart Tolle or Tolle. And, you know, the New Earth and the different books he's written. I've read them, a couple of them. And when I read them, it's interesting because I'll read them a year later and get something totally different. And the book sat on my shelf. Nobody reprinted the book. And yet what I read, it's like, wait a minute, I don't remember any of this. So he's done a really good job of teaching different constructs in ways of thinking and being present as well. The 4th one is Elon Musk. Now, I would argue that if you and I sat down with Elon and said, are you a spiritual leader? He'd say, no. But look at what he's done. Look at what he's gone through from a child all the way up to now. Look at how many people have told him that everything he's doing is impossible. And yet look at what he's done. It's impossible to create a car manufacturing plant in today's age. DeLorean failed miserably. You can't do it. It won't happen. And yet, arguably, Tesla's the largest car manufacturer in the world now. It is absolutely impossible for you to reuse and land rockets. Nobody's done it. All the governments have tried. NASA's spent billions of dollars. You can't do it. And yet, a few years later, he's doing it as commonplace. It's absolutely impossible for you to run, for anybody to run multiple multi-million-dollar companies. Nobody can do it. It's impossible. Yeah, he's doing that too. So here's a guy that I would say is really tapped in to removing doubt from the picture, not listening to the naysayers and the people that tell him what he can't do, and doing it anyway. And, you know, whether we call that spirituality or not, what I'm trying to say in the book is, hey, folks, this is an example of somebody that's going and doing what he wants to do based on belief. And he clearly is tapped into something. And, you know, his goal, I think, is a fantastic goal, and that's to create a multi-planet species. So anyway, like I said, a lot of people disagree with me in adding him to the 4th character in the, you know, the main like focal point in the book, but look at what he's done and told he couldn't do.
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder if politics weren't at play there, you know, his association with the Trump administration, what he was doing with Doge, if people would have had that the same reaction. And it's funny, I see on and I live in the Northeast, it's not exactly a red area, but you see everybody who's got Teslas up here have the same bumper sticker that says, you know, I bought this before we knew Elon was crazy. You know, and it's funny, I have a very good friend who said, you know, his conservative friends made fun of him when he bought a Tesla, I don't know, like 7-8 years ago. And now his liberal friends, you know, make fun of him because he owns a Tesla right now. But no, I think it's an interesting comparison, and of course it brings to mind all these things that we're told are impossible, like breaking the 4-minute mile, and then all of a sudden, once one person does it, it's becoming more commonplace. Or finding DNA, finding scientific advances, like they all kind of happen around the same time. Now, of course, it could be, hey, all these people are working on the same problem and enough time and investment goes into it, and you get these breakthroughs all happening around the same timeline. But there could be a metaphysical part to it as well. Once it is known that it can happen, then it happens more and more.
Like a group consciousness.
Like a group consciousness, and maybe Carl Jung wasn't too far off thinking about the collective unconsciousness, sort of what we all kind of remember as a species.
Did you ever see the movie The Forbidden Planet?
Oh my God, with Leslie Nielsen, and that was the first instance of Robbie the robot, if I remember correctly. Sure.
Yeah. Do you remember the premise of what was going on? What happened?
Couldn't tell. If you put a gun to my head, I would not be able to tell you. But I remember watching it so many times with my twin brother Jimmy.
So I've been blessed with the fact that I can usually remember even like paragraphs out of a book that I read 30 years ago. So the general gist of the movie was they went to a planet. There was a older scientist there. His entire team was wiped out except for his daughter. And they had discovered this huge facility made by aliens. And the facility had this immense power generation capability. I mean, it had the ability to like do the output of a sun kind of thing. And what had happened is the entire alien race had been annihilated. And when they got there, the equipment was all running. And then all of a sudden, all the people that got the scientists there started dying off. And when Nielsen's group landed with their ship, they had a laser fence around, and the laser fence started getting impacted and everything. And this happened just as Robbie the robot came and picked him up. And then I think it was Nielsen and the daughter got along, and they started talking. And then all of a sudden, these attacks started happening on the fence. And then they saw these huge claw marks in the ground and all these different things going on. And what it turned out, I'm going to go to the punchline, right? What was going on and what they found out is that this machine read the mind and created whatever you wanted to create. But what was killing everybody and what killed everybody was the scientist was not in control of his jealousy and his subconscious. And so he was creating these monsters to get rid of anybody that had any interest in his daughter at all. But it was all subconsciously created. He was creating this monster from that point of view.
He sounds like the world's worst father-in-law.
It was, but what stayed with me is that here's the subconscious running. Yeah, I mean, absolutely, you're right. But it was the subconscious and not understanding how powerful the subconscious was that, in effect, what was going after everybody. Yeah,
it'd be interesting to see a remake of that movie. You talked about reading the Bible with a different lens because of some insights you had while you were writing The Infinity Within. But back in the 50s, I think that movie was from the 50s.
Yeah, it was black and white.
AI was theoretical. It was far off on the horizon. It really was science fiction. But today, AI is not theoretical. And, I even watch movies like I rewatched War Games not too long ago. And same thing, or even the original Tron, same thing. AI, if those movies were remade today, AI brings our knowledge of AI, our experience, our tangible experience with it brings a different lens to those stories. So
now, Tron you can have fun with. You have the original one, which is arguably hard to watch.
Oh no, I watched that movie not long ago, and yeah, the graphics are a little cringy, but the
They're
story
really
is
cringy,
amazing.
yeah.
The story is amazing.
But then there's the middle one,
Yeah,
which is actually pretty good, and I love the soundtrack in the middle one.
great soundtrack.
Have you watched the third one?
I have, and I didn't like the first half of it, but then I watched when I got to the second half, I'm like, oh man, this is really good.
Exactly right.
They go back in time, like
Yeah. So yeah, it's Tron is a really good example of understanding what AI really could be, all the way to where AI is headed.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. You know what I do wish? I wish that the Matrix sequels were actually better than they were, because they didn't really strike the same chord as that first one. And what was it, 99? Mm-hmm. That, the rest were a little, I watched them, but they didn't have that same punch. And I think they certainly could. And Chris, I could talk to you.
The spiritual flavor of it.
Perhaps. I think so. I mean, if you just look at just the name of the ship, Nebuchadnezzar, right? They were borrowing so much from like sacred texts, and even getting down to the red pill and the blue pill. What path do you want to choose? Are you going to go on the path of righteousness or total conformity? It's I'm sure there have been doctorate theses written about the Matrix. I've no doubt about that.
Yeah, no, it's got a lot of really good meat. Whether or not we're in a computer construct, the idea of fear and doubt and how it drives us, and the power of removing doubt from the equation is what one of the fundamental things that Matrix is about.
Well, and it's not too far off from what, a lot of people talk about manifesting, your reality. And part of that is shedding doubt, shedding fear, believing in what you want, but acting as if you already have it. And then it attracts to you. That used to work for me in business years ago when I needed a project. I was self-employed for a long time. And I'd say, universe, it's time. We got to get busy. And, I would put it out there, but then I would also act like I already had it. And then the phone would ring. It was very strange. But that lesson is forgotten also over time.
Well, and the very words, look at the words you were taught to say. That was very strange.
Yeah, exactly.
I would argue that that's very common once you understand how everything's working. And at that time, it sounds like you had a pretty firm grasp of it.
I did. But what's interesting, you're mentioning that, are we in a computer? Well, the question was like the Matrix presents a computer simulation, but it's not too far off from what we were talking about really early in this conversation, which was when you were 6 and then 8, kind of getting a peek through the veil onto the other side of a simulation. So maybe it's not computers and ones and zeros, maybe it's something else.
Our soul and agreeing to forget that we had one.
Yeah. I could talk about this for hours, Chris, but I do need to wrap up.
Understood.
What else do we need to know about the Infinity Within? What else, if anything, would you like to share with us about it?
Well, I think the easy answer to that is I wrote it as kind of a non-fictional memoir with a fictional character named Gabriel, or Gabe, and he meets his mentor named Elias. And Elias is a really good mentor in that he doesn't preach or tell anything. He asks lots of questions. The book is written in the same way. I did not write it in a way to tell people what to believe or how to believe or preach people on what to do and all that. That's not my goal. My goal is to have fun reading about Gabe going through his life and learning how things might be operating, and what resonates with the reader as they're reading, fantastic, and what doesn't, you just leave behind. And it's designed to be fun. It's designed to be picturesque. It's designed to really create visual constructs as you're reading it. I'll tell you a quick kind of ego boosting story if you want.
Could always use an ego boost, Kris.
Okay. Well, this is for my ego, but I'd love to share it. But I pre-warned it was really very cool to have happen. So I finished publishing the book in July of 25, and I needed to get the Audible book done. So I did a ton of research, and I found a particular narrator that I felt would be an excellent match. His name's Eduardo Bellini, and I'm probably butchering his name, but it's close. Anywho, so I got a hold of Eduardo, and the first thing he said was, I'm going to be a little expensive. And I said, I get that, because Eduardo has done over 750 narrations. He's an award-winning narrator. He's done narrations for Eckhart Tolle, for Dean Koontz, for the Dalai Lama, for, I think, The Untethered Soul, I believe. But anyway, a bunch of books in this niche. And like I said, over 750 books. He's also an actor. I think he's also a producer, and I think he's on a TV series as we speak. Anyway, so we get past the financial part, and he says, well, the other problem is I've got a full schedule. So I may not be able to get to this until the middle of 26. I said, I get that too, but I want you to be the narrator. I really think you'll do a fantastic job. He says, okay. So in Audible, you have to do a 15-minute test. So he does the 15-minute test, and the next day he gets a hold of me. He says, yeah, Kris, I'm not putting this book down. I'm finishing it this week. I've put my other projects on the back burner, and I will be getting this done. So that was huge. But also, if you enjoy Audible books, he did a fantastic job of reading it.
That is a major ego boost to you. So it's a great testament to the power of the story. If somebody with that sort of notoriety and schedule can put everything else on hold because he believes so much in it, that's an amazing story. And
keep in mind, this is my first spiritual book I've ever written, so it's very nice to have that kind of pat on the back.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think he'll do the audio version of your home improvement series?
No. And quite frankly, I have a phenomenal narrator that does that already. However, The Infinity Within is designed to be a trilogy. I'm on my third rewrite of the second book, and it's called The Orchard Hush. And the third book I have an outline for, and he has pretty much, tentatively agreed to read both of those.
Fantastic. Kris, where can people learn more about you? Do you have a website, or are you active on social media?
So I've been blessed. First off, Kris Land, KrisLand.com. You can find me there. If you put in my name or The Infinity Within, about the first 3 pages of Google come up with me. So very, very lucky in that sense. You can get the book and the Audible book, obviously, on Amazon, Apple, Barnes & Noble. Of all places, you can go to Walmart and get the book. There's bookstores in Norway, Barcelona selling the book, India. So it's available pretty much anywhere right now.
All right, I'll be certain to put links to your website, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, anywhere else I can find you, and of course links to where people can buy the book in our show notes, so people can find it nice and easily just by going over to the show notes. And Kris, I will say thank you so much for stopping by Uncorking a Story and letting me uncork yours.
Thank you, Mike. Very much appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Uncorking a Story. If you'd like more information about today's guest or to find out more about Mike, go to uncorkingastory.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review us at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in every week to hear Mike Carlin uncork a new story.